You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Folks, Viacom CBS chose to end their long-running relationship with Nick Cannon after a podcast interview with Professor Griff, formerly of Public Enemy. Viacom CBS accuses Cannon of promoting hateful speech and spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories from this podcast.
Then let's go to what it really is then. When we talk about the power of melanated people, when we talk about who we really are as guys and understanding that our melanin is so powerful and it connects us in a way that the reason why they fear black, the reason why they fear is because the lack that they have of it. So then when you see what, Dr. Francis C. Welsing talked about is that fear in that
genetic annihilation
deficiency of when you have a person that has the lack of pigment, the lack of melanin, that they know that they will be annihilated. So therefore, however they got the power, they have the lack of compassion. That melanin comes with compassion. Melanin comes with soul that we call it soul. We soul brothers and sisters. That's the melanin that connects us. So the people that don't have it are a little, and I'm gonna say this carefully, are a little less, and where the term actually comes from, because I'm bringing it all the way back around to Minister Farrakhan, to where they may not have the compassion or the when they were sent to the mountains of Caucasus, when they didn't have the power of the sun, that the sun then started to deteriorate them. So then they're acting out of fear, they're acting out of low self-esteem, they're acting out of a deficiency. So therefore, the only way that they can act is evil. The only way they have to rob, steal, rape, kill, and
fight or flight,
in order to survive.
Exactly.
So then these people who didn't have what we had, and when I say we, I speak of the melanated people. Right. They had to be savages. They had to be barbaric. Because they're in these Nordic mountains. They're in these rough, torrential environments. So they're acting as animals. Right. So they're the ones that are actually closer to animals. They're the ones that are actually the true savages. And then they built up such this I don't want to say warrior, but they built up such this conquering barbaric mentality.
Now, it was more than an hour-long podcast. Cannon later took to social media and said this: anyone who knows me knows that I have no hate in my heart, nor malice intentions. I do not condone hate speech nor the spread of hateful rhetoric. We are living in a time when it is more important than ever to promote unity and understanding. The Black and Jewish communities have both faced enormous hatred, oppression, persecution, and prejudice for thousands of years, and in many ways have and will continue to work together to overcome these obstacles. When you look at the media and other sectors in our nation's history, African Americans and the people of the Jewish community have partnered to create some of the best, most revolutionary work we know today. I'm an advocate for people's voices to be heard openly, fairly, and candidly. In today's conversation about anti-racism and social justice, I think we all, including myself, must continue educating one another and embrace uncomfortable conversations. It's the only way we all get better. I encourage more healthy dialogue and welcome any experts, clergy, or spokespersons to any of my platforms to hold me accountable and correct me in any statement that I've made that has been projected as negative. Until then, I hold myself accountable for this moment and take full responsibility, because my intentions are only to show that as a beautiful human species, we have way more commonalities than differences. So let's embrace those as well as each other. Now, that's what he released on Monday. This is the statement that Viacom released on Tuesday. Statements from Viacom CBS about Nick Cannon attributed to Viacom CBS spokesperson. Viacom CBS condemns bigotry of any kind, and we categorically denounce all forms of anti-Semitism. We have spoken with Nick Cannon about an episode of his podcast, Cannon's Class, on YouTube, which promoted hateful speech and spread anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. While we support ongoing education and dialogue in the fight against bigotry, we're deeply troubled that Nick has failed to acknowledge or apologize for perpetuating anti-Semitism, and we are terminating our relationship with him. We're committed to doing better in our response to incidents of anti-Semitism, racism, and bigotry. Viacom CBS will have further announcements on our efforts to combat hate of all kinds. Now, other folks got involved, and this thing, of course, took off on social media, you name it. Dwayne Wade sent a tweet out where he said, to Nick Cannon, "We are with you, keep leading." That was today at 1:56 p.m. Well, Wade got lots of criticism from folks for that particular tweet. He then tweeted this out: "I want to clarify my now deleted tweet. I was not supporting or condoning what Nick Cannon specifically said, but I had expressed my support of him owning the content and brand he helped create." That was at 4:32 p.m. He then tweeted this. I was too quick to respond. This is an hour later, because he got more criticism. "I was too quick to respond without being fully informed about his hurtful anti-Semitic remarks. As you all know, I have zero tolerance for any hate speech." Now, that was his particular tweet. Diddy sent out a tweet, and this is what Diddy sent out. He said right here, "Nick Cannon, come home to Revolt TV, truly black owned. We got your back and love you and what you have done for the culture. We are for our people first. For us, by us, let's go." Now, there's a new development in this, and that is Nick Cannon now is stating on his page, point blank, that he said that Viacom, he wants ownership of Wild 'N Out, the show that he created. He produced a 1,500 word response on his Facebook page. He has about 3 million followers on his Facebook page. And he demands, so this is, let's see here. This is what he tweeted out. Let's see if I can increase this. "My apologies." He laid it all out. "I'm deeply sad in a moment so close to reconciliation that the powers that be misused an important moment for us to all grow closer together and learn more about one another. Instead, the moment was stolen and hijacked to make an example of an outspoken black man. I will not be bullied, silenced, or continuously oppressed by any organization, group, or corporation. I am disappointed that Viacom does not understand or respect the power of the black community." He then goes in and details his relationship with Viacom as a family over the last 20 years. He also lays out that in terms of what's going on here. And then you also, of course, have him operating as host and executive producer of the Mass singer. Now, no word on whether or not that's what's going to happen there. He also has a daily talk show host. Then has a daily radio show. No word on any of those. But he also is now demanding that Viacom CBS give him ownership of his show while they're out, saying it was swindled from him. Panel, take it away. Your thoughts on all of this. Scott, I think you want to go first.
Who wants to go first?
Who wants to go first?
Who wants to jump in this mess first? I think ladies first.
Okay. Well, I would say this. I think this was
I love you.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
I think this was I think this sounded like, 90s hotepery all over again. There was nothing new that had not been said before. And I think one of the things that Nick Cannon is quite clear about the words he uses. He's not a boy, despite his boyish looks. That is a almost 40-year-old man and a father and, a college graduate. So, Nick Cannon was very aware of what he was saying. I think the issues of his ownership of his content is a separate issue from what he said. I think what he said was ill-informed. And unfortunately, for many, there is a desire and a yearning for knowledge and to want to understand why the world looks the way it does and why it's unfair to Black people. Unfortunately, sometimes people get led astray, even though it's in a book. I always tell my students, be skeptical. How would somebody know this? How would they get to this conclusion? Right. And I think that even though he's citing, some well-respected work there, that work is questionable on a number of fronts. And I think, whenever we have a platform as big as Nick Cannon's, we always have to be mindful. We always have to be thoughtful. And you can say whatever you want to say. But of course, we know what we say has consequences. So he's not canceled. He's not deplatformed. He won't be broke. His life won't be over. Right. He'll just have a different venue to ply his many shows and other kinds of things. But I will say, I think what he said wasn't actually really all that helpful in this particular moment. It didn't really move the discourse forward. And as I always tell my students, the truth doesn't need a remix. It's bad enough.
He had positive things to say about Minister Louis Farrakhan, Robert. A number of people took exception with those comments as well. Again, what we played was a 2-minute clip of an hour-and-a-half conversation. But your thoughts on him making it clear that he's not going to apologize and back down.
Well, I think that's his right and his prerogative. The mistake I do think that he has made is not getting those ownership rights up front. You can't, and this is what I tell people in corporate America all the time who feel like they are safe in their corporate jobs. Everything you're working for somebody else. You cannot work for somebody else for several decades, and then once things go badly, then demand ownership. You have to negotiate that ownership stake while you're negotiating your contracts. You have to ensure that when you have negotiating power, right now you've already been terminated. You do not have power. You cannot set any criteria. Viacom does not have to listen to anything that you have to say because you've been terminated. So it's important for us to understand, particularly in the African-American community, stop looking for someone else's table to sit at. Stop being comfortable eating at somebody else's establishment. You have to establish these things for yourself. If you want to be in this entire, as Puffy tweeted out, for us, by us space, that means you might have to suffer for a little while in the wilderness before things work out for you. And you cannot be comfortable with somebody else and then want to be critical of them once things do not work out.
It's interesting that he wrote this here, Scott, in a pleasant turn of events and the best blessing in all of this hurtful attack as the outpouring of love and support from the Jewish community. It has been amazing. I've spoken with many rabbis, clergy, professors, and co-workers who offer their sincere help. I must apologize to my Jewish brothers and sisters for putting them in such a painful position, which was never my intention, but I know this whole situation has hurt many people, and together we will make it right. I've dedicated my daily efforts to continuing conversations to bring the Jewish community and the African-American community closer together, embracing our differences and sharing our commonalities. Through the guidance of my multicultural team, which embodies several people from the Jewish community, specifically Michael Goldman, my business partner for 3 decades, who discovered me at the Hollywood Improv when I was doing stand-up as a kid. Through thick and thin, he has been by my side, yelling at me when I talk too much and laughing with me as we've always overcome adversity together. I love you, my brother. Thank you for helping me become the man that I am today. He then goes on to say in here, he says, Viacom, that they are on the wrong side of history. That's what he says. So that's it. So, Scott, what do you make of that?
Let me tell you what I make of it. I listened to the show I've seen other transcripts of it. I've listened to, that sounded like an apology, but I'm not sure it was. I've watched the Dwayne Wade piece. And let me tell you something. This debate between African Americans and the Jewish population or Jewish Americans is not old, is not new at all, first of all. And people who have been in the struggle, whether you're black, Jewish, whatever, Indian, American Indian, Native American, there is no upside to comparing our struggles to one another. We should stop comparing those struggles. It's no problem to lock arms and move forward, but stop comparing our struggle to each other's struggle because there's no upside. How many times have we seen this? Black people and black revolutionaries want to get on and talk about different struggles, and then they do the comparative to make black people the chosen one. You're free to believe whatever you want to believe, but everybody doesn't need to know what you believe if you're in certain positions. You don't have a right to be on a show or be tied up or connected to Viacom. And if you want to be a martyr or you want to be an activist, then so be it then. Sometimes you got to choose between the money and activism. That's a personal choice. But I can tell you one thing. Every time I've seen someone of any power, of any notoriety, get into this debate about blacks and Jews, it doesn't end well. We need to stop it because it doesn't move the ball forward. The only way we can move the ball forward is locking arms with each other and moving forward towards one America. And not this one black America, one white America, one Jewish America, one Irish America. We got to lock arms and move forward together. That is the only way forward. That's the only way we're going to get rid of America's original sin, and we're going to attain or reach freedom, justice, and equality.
He says that black people can't be anti-Semitic since we are the original Hebrews, that we are Semitic people.
Why debate that? Why raise it? How is that educational? You see,
look, Roland, anybody who's been at a barbershop in the West End in Atlanta has heard this exact same speech. And so some guy, in incense with a dashiki on who read like a couple pamphlets, and they want to sell you on this level of mythology. We have real problems right now that we're trying to solve. We don't need to go into the genetic lineage of every group of individuals on the planet Earth. We can solve the problems that we have right now. And if you go through the civil rights movement, you can look at Cheney, Swerner, and Goodman, who died for this cause. You can look at the NAACP and its founding, where you had a lot of Jewish Americans who were part of the founding of those organizations, a lot of financing behind much of the social justice activism right now. Where do you think all these signs come from? Where do you think these banners are coming from? They're being financed and supported by a diverse group of people who are like-minded. So why go into the conspiracy theory rabbit holes when we can be solving problems right now?
Well, it's interesting, but Dr. Carter, it's interesting. There are a lot of folks who are watching us right now. I'm looking at comments on Facebook and Periscope and YouTube, and folks are saying Nick is right.
I mean, look, there will always be somebody who is willing to believe anything. And I think it comes from what people have experienced and what people have witnessed, and we want to answer for it, right? Because some of the things that Black people have experienced are so horrendous, we have to have an answer. Unfortunately, Nick Cannon doesn't have that answer, and neither do many of the people that he cites. And I think part of the problem is if you keep looking backward, you can't look forward. And it doesn't mean we're saying nobody cares about Black people and we shouldn't care about, so the uniqueness of our experience and our culture. Nobody is saying that or suggesting that. But it's saying that if we're going to do anything forward thinking, then it can't be because we're tethered to these old notions about race, because that same racial science that he's playing with is the same racial science that justified Black people's enslavement and continued denigration in this country. And we don't want to be a part of that. We shouldn't be a part of that. Our justice is not going to come on somebody else's neck.
Exactly. Final comment, Scott.
Exactly. We only got one country, this experiment, right? Nothing good. Now that you've said all that you've said, Nick Cannon, right? And now that you have your social media followers who say, Nick, you're right. All right, now what? Now what? Now where's that going to get us? Does that get us to one country yet? Does that get us closer to our Jewish brothers and sisters? They were on the front line in the 60s. They were on the front line doing Jim Crow, if not all of them, a lot of them. And we didn't get civil rights, and we didn't move forward in whatever industry there is without the help of people that didn't look like us or people that struggled like us.
Gotcha.
I'm not saying he's right or wrong. What I'm saying is it's not necessary to the debate. It doesn't add to us moving forward.
All right, folks. We'll have part 2 of this conversation tomorrow right here on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Are you back tomorrow?
No, we're not.
No, sorry.
No, we're not. No, we're not. We have the Thursday panel.
Thought we had that deal.
For the Thursday panel for that. So Scott, Robert, and Dr. Carter, we surely appreciate you joining us today. Thanks a bunch. Speaking of drama, we told you yesterday that Nick Cannon was removed from Viacom CBS over a podcast that he did with Professor Griff, formerly of Public Enemy, where he was accused of making anti-Semitic remarks. Well, yesterday, in a series post, Nick Cannon apologized, and this is what he said. First and foremost, I extend my deepest and most sincere apologies to my Jewish sisters and brothers for the hurtful and divisive words that came out of my mouth during my interview with Richard Griffin. They reinforce the worst stereotypes of a proud and magnificent people, and I feel ashamed of the uninformed and naive place that these words came from. The video of this interview has since been removed. While the Jewish experience encompasses more than 5,000 years and there is so much I have yet to learn, I have had at least a minor history lesson over the past few days, and to say that is eye-opening would be a vast understatement. As a result, I want to express my gratitude to the rabbis, community leaders, and institutions who reach out to me to help enlighten me instead of chastising me. I want to assure my Jewish friends, new and old, that this is only the beginning of my education. I am committed to deeper connections, more profound learning, and strengthening the bond between our two cultures today and every day going forward. Now, he also said this here. I just had the blessed opportunity to converse with Rabbi Abraham Cooper, Director of Global Social Action, the Simon Wiesenthal Center. My first words to my brother was, I apologize for the hurt I caused the Jewish community. On my podcast, I use words and reference literature I assume to be factual to uplift my community instead turn out to be hateful propaganda and stereotypical rhetoric that pain another community. For this, I am deeply sorry, but now together we can write a new chapter of healing. As a result of this, the folks at Fox announced that he will continue to be the host and executive producer of the show The Masked Singer. I want to go to our panel now. Greg Carr, of course, he graduated just this spring from Howard University. What do you make of all of this? What he released on Monday, which then led to Viacom CBS firing him on Tuesday, was totally different from the tone of the tweets last night.
Well, Nick is smarter than any of the people who are lined up against him. And I say that in this particular sense because, you know, one thing I know to be true about Nick Cannon is that he comes out of black community. He's going to stand with black community. And he's an honest guy, and he's always very, very, very thoughtful in how he moves. And as far as Cannon's class is concerned, that's something Nick really created. He actually birthed it while he was a student at Howard. I was on the first Cannon's class and have been on several since. It was a conduit to bring people into conversation around books and ideas. And if you know anything about Nick, he talks to every and anybody, and he's the same guy all the time. He's like you. I mean, you see him, that's who you see. I think Viacom reacted as the result of Deshaun Jackson and Steven Jackson and Ice Cube, so somebody had to pay. And I think they overreacted because one thing about Nick, he's going to smile, he's going to laugh. I've never seen him angry, but one thing's for sure. He's a businessman. So, yeah, they punched him in the mouth. But guess what? Now he wants his intellectual property. And whether he gets it or not, they can keep the name Wildin' Out. And they had a 25-year relationship with this man. At the same time, what they can't keep is the thing that keeps Nick Cannon centered. And that's who he is. I expect there to be continuing unfolding of this story. I expect Viacom to either try to walk something back or do some back channel negotiation with him. I don't know that he would go back into any form of relationship, but I know when Diddy offered him to come over to Revolt, he hadn't said anything about that. I know that Fox is going to continue with The Masked Singer. I know that he's supposed to be debuting a talk show in the fall. And I know one thing, never bet against somebody who values themselves beyond any context. And we can talk about all that anti-Semitism stuff another time, because, you know, people are calling stuff hotepery. Anybody says hotep, I probably at the moment they say that, I mute them in my mind, because I know that they don't know enough about the conversation to continue the conversation intelligently.
Well,
and
Greg,
we can talk about that another time.
Well, Greg, on that point, people who were criticizing him were blasting that very thing. And so you just said it. So when you hear people condemn Hotep and consider it to be some far nutcase sort of deal, that obviously, because we discussed this before, doesn't sit well with you.
Well, no, I mean, it doesn't sit well or not sit well with me. I don't take them seriously because they don't know enough to have an intelligent conversation. There are two dimensions to the question of Black-Jewish relationships in the modern era. One of them is the cultural question. And that's really when they say Hotep, I think that's what they're talking about. Although they don't know what Hotep means, I could write it in glyphs on their forehead and they wouldn't be able to translate it. But they're using that as a label for the idea of a stew of conspiracy theories and off history. They don't know enough history to talk about whether it's off or not. And what you saw with that exchange with Professor Griff, Nick was talking about books that Griff had written, and then he's dropping in things from what he had read, which a lot of that is street literature. And there's a real conversation to be had as to why that literature exists. So if you watch the whole Candace class, you can see him trying to weave in and out of that, but then he introduces some other conversations that speak to that street literature. The people who are saying, oh, that's Hotep, are really talking about that type of literature that has existed outside of the university. But inside the university, there's no real debate about the origins of the Abrahamic faith traditions. They all come out of Northeast Africa, beginning with Judaism. And Jews are not white initially. But that gets conflated into another kind of conversation, and that's the second category. The second category is the political category of people in white nationalist societies trying to avoid last place. If we understand the history of Judaism, we understand that Jews have been persecuted for centuries. And most of that persecution in the United States has come from white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, the biggest anti-Semite in American history. There's one candidate we could name. His name would be Henry Ford, who wrote a whole 3 volumes called The International Jew, the world's foremost problems. Jews had to fight like a number of white ethnics in this country to battle their way into whiteness at the risk of persecution. The Klan didn't like the Jews, the Klan didn't like the Catholics, and the Klan didn't like the blacks. So what you have then is coalition politics, which forms between white ethnics and black folk at key moments. Harold Cruz writes about it in his book, Plural but Equal. But what you also have is tensions that emerge as well. Because ultimately, for example, when you have some of the Jewish organizations take the opposite side against black people in the Baki case in the 1970s, as Jews become more assimilated into white culture, you have this negotiation with the blacks who get left behind. That's the source of tensions. It's too sophisticated to be carried out in an hour in Cannon's class when Nick is talking about to somebody who's basically come out of those communities trying to puzzle through that. But I'll tell you one thing about Nick Cannon. If he lives, every word he tweeted and said in that apology, he's going to stick by it. You know who he's going to invite to that Cannon's class table? He's going to invite all the rabbis. He's going to invite the scholars. He's going to read every word of every book anybody tell him to read. And what will emerge out of this is the real culprit. And the real culprit in this, as far as I'm concerned, Viacom and everybody else, are these corporations that don't like any Negro to get too uppity and have too much power. And you got to bring them out in the yard and try to cut their foot off in front of everybody else before anybody else get any ideas about being independent.
These were tweets he also posted today. Let me read those. Folks, pull those up. He said, morning radio family, I've decided to take some time away from my radio show so I can commit myself to deeper, more thorough reflection and education. I will use this time to establish an action plan towards real impactful change and advocacy aimed at bringing people together. I continue to express my gratitude to the rabbis, community leaders, and institutions who have reached out to me to help enlighten me. Their input and friendship will help me as I further commit myself to more profound learning and towards strengthening the bond between the Black and Jewish cultures every day going forward. Erica, your thoughts?
Yeah, I pretty much saw that this was the way that this kind of was the direction that the tweets were going to go in. But I just, when I started kind of like looking back on everything that had kind of happened, it was amazing to me that this was a podcast that had been living since June 30. And so just looking at how this, took fire in this present day, and the way that Nick has really handled this, taking a break away from his morning radio show, saying that, as Dr. Carr has just said, he's going to take time and sit with all of those people that he's going to begin to build action plans with. As somebody who is a businessman, somebody who has really kind of shown the way how to move throughout, having been a child actor and developed programming, I'm really going to be watching and to see the other side, how Nick is going to move and matriculate through this. And I think that that's going to be very interesting to see. One last thing that I would add is that, we are in a country that has built its assets off of being anti-Black. And so while anti-Semitism is definitely something that, all of us should really denounce, that we also have to be very, very conscious of the movement in the moment that we're in right now. And that is to move and push forward away from anti-Black acts that we continue to see surface throughout this nation.
Reese, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote a piece in The Hollywood Reporter where he took to task African Americans over anti-Semitism. He wrote this piece, "Where is the outrage over anti-Semitism in sports in Hollywood?" He talked about Ice Cube. He talked about Deshaun Jackson, and any number of things. He basically is challenging, African Americans on this very issue, and again, Hollywood as well. And then he says, yes, some of the above have apologized, Deshaun Jackson, Steven Jackson, Chelsea Handler, while others continue to defiantly marinate in their own prejudice. Their arrogant and irrational response to accusations of anti-Semitism, rather than dissuade us, actually confirm people's worst opinions. Ice Cube's response was remorseless. What if I was just pro-Black? This is the true brother. I didn't lie on anyone. I didn't say I was anti-anybody. Don't believe the hype. I've been telling my truth. Jabbar writes, his truth was clearly anti-Semitic, but like Trump, he believes his truth exists outside facts.
Yeah, so, I don't proclaim to be sophisticated enough, as Dr. Carr expertly laid out. It's a far more complicated subject than to discuss in sound bites. But I think to what I will say to Nick Cannon's statements, I do applaud him. By his own admission, I'm just going to say what he said. He called himself ignorant. And one of the things I appreciate about his statement is that he is not going to die on that hill. And I think that a big problem that we have in our society is what I call belligerently ignorant people. People who have this complete adherence to misinformation, to disinformation, to ill-informed opinions, and they are just completely belligerent about it and unwilling to yield to new information. And I think that what Nick Cannon did, people might question his sincerity in that, and I think that's on them to draw that conclusion or not. But I do applaud that he said, listen, when presented with new information, I don't want to continue to perpetuate these statements that I made. I want to learn. I want to invite people into this conversation. I want to take a step away. And I think if more people did that, we would all be better off for it, because I get in arguments with belligerently ignorant people all day, every day. So if there's somebody who's willing to say I was misinformed, or however you want to characterize it, I was ignorant as he characterized it, then more power to them.
Greg, this is what in the final paragraph of Jabbar, he says, the lesson never changes. So why is it so hard for some people to learn? No one is free until everyone is free. As Martin Luther King Jr. explained, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. So let's act like it. If we're going to be outraged by injustice, let's be outraged by injustice against anyone. This back and forth is not new. Recently, of course, Fox Soul, when they announced they were not going to carry the speech on July 4th of Nation of Islam minister Louis Farrakhan, he writes in there how Chelsea Handler, she had posted a video of Louis Farrakhan denouncing white supremacy. And she defended it. And she said he was speaking truth. That people criticized her, and then after several days, she finally took it down. There were people who actually were upset when Cornel West was on this show, and when he addressed the issue of Farrakhan speaking about Hitler, and people were like, "Oh, Cornel West is wrong as well." Just Greg, this thing that keeps cropping up where this anti-Semitic, no, I'm not. We're black, we're Semitic, so therefore we can't be anti-Semitic. And there's sort of this whole back and forth. And as Cornel West said, he said, I agree with Minister Farrakhan because he preaches against white supremacy, but I disagree with other stuff. But then there are people who say, wait a minute, you can't do that. You can't agree with some of what he says and disagree with others. Folks who say David Duke is no different than Louis Farrakhan. All of these different things, they continue to crop up. Just your assessment.
Very quickly, I think, Reese, what you said is absolutely correct. We're talking about whether people have information or not, whether they know or not. You know, I have an immense amount of respect for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He wasn't just an athlete. He is an intellectual. He's a writer. And when he was a teenager in New York City, going to Power Memorial High School, when he was still Lou Alcindor, he attended a summer program, the RMU Act, which was taught in part by John Henry Clark, one of his heroes. John Henry Clark was called an anti-Semite from the pages of the New York Times by Henry Louis Gates in an article called Black Demagogues and Pseudo Scholars, where he tried to say all these black scholars who are reaching these black people in the streets, some of them are anti-Semitic because they make claims about the nature of the Jewish religion and where black people come from and what blacks are the original Jews and the Beta Israels and whether or not black people can be anti-Semitic. Let's be very clear. Anybody who is standing in the way of somebody else's human rights is in violation. We don't care. And let's also be very clear. A number of Jews very prominent in not only the civil rights, black power, liberation movements. So we can't use these categories to beat up whole groups of people. Let's also be very clear. Muhammad Ali, when he came out and became Muhammad Ali and not Cassius Clay, who influenced, among others, Lou Alcindor to become Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, has also been accused of anti-Semitism because he was in the Nation of Islam. Let's also be very clear that these conversations, as Reese said, we can't have these conversations without nuance and without information. So Kareem is absolutely right when he says we can't have intolerance, but he can't say that outside of a historical context that has found him often on the opposite side of white opinion. And in this country, whether you be Jew or Gentile, whether you be Catholic or Protestant, whether you be Muslim or Christian, the politics of this country revolve around, and that is what this is about. This is about race. Finally, I will say this. If we're going to have an intelligent conversation going forward, we have to, and I think this is what Nick is doing, as he said, whether we gauge the sincerity of his apology or not. And I, for one, individually will not gauge the sincerity because I believe he's being absolutely sincere. We must first confess our innocence. People who talk with such cocksure surety about issues like this are usually the least informed people in the room.
Come on.
All right now.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.